You are now listening to the Project Life podcast, where we take project management concepts and apply them to your everyday life. Broadcasting from the Lone Star State in Austin, Texas, help me welcome your host, Mr. George Lopez.
What is going on, everybody? My name is George Lopez, and I am back with you once again, and welcome to week 3 of the Project Life podcast. I am glad that you guys are back, and I'm glad that you guys are here to join me once again. And I just got to say, the show over the next few weeks is going to continue to improve. I notice you guys noticed we got a new intro. We'll have a new outro for the show as we continue to grow and get things bigger and bigger and bigger. Websites coming and things of that sort. So as we go along through this, we'll announce new additions to the show, new things. You'll hear new things. You'll hear better sound quality and everything else. So as we continue to grow, and I continue to figure all this stuff out about getting this great message out to you guys. And as we jump into week 3, I want to once again let's go ahead and recap last week's episode 2 on setting that foundation and going over, identifying your stakeholders and coming up with that project charter. And the biggest takeaway that you could take away from last week's show, if you did not grasp it from the show, this is me kind of diving it down just a little bit more, is that the key takeaway to last week's show is actually taking action and putting pen to paper in setting the foundation for the project within your life. Again, this show, we want to help encourage you and to help tap in to the skills that you already have and things that you're already doing, and giving you a couple more tools to add to your toolbox to refine your skills and really to help push you to that next level. So when you're looking at it, last week was about, again, identifying stakeholders and building a project charter were the 2 project management concepts that we used. But as we just relate it to day-to-day business, it's really just knowing who your audience is, knowing the people, and identifying all the people that are going to be involved in your project, whether it's a small life project, whether it's a big life project, whether it's a 6-month project, a 3-year project, if it's a self-improvement project, whatever project you have, identifying those that are going to be involved, and always continuously understanding that you're going to have to update that, especially if it's going to be a longer project that you're going to have within your life, because people are going to come and go, right? And having that written down somewhere, having that foundation is going to be key, because just like any project manager on the civilian side, having that project charter is a reference point to go back to. So if things start to change or things start to get out of hand, it's that reference point to go back and look at, why was this project started? Did we know about what the benefits were going to be? Do we know what kind of commitments were going to need to happen? What kind of requirements were we looking for? Going back and looking at case study. And you could do the same thing with your own life. If you actually sit down and you build the foundation to anything, it will help you succeed and push your life further and further along. And when I talk about that foundation, I'm literally talking about writing down everything you want to do on this project. And I'll take something as simple as this project right here that I'm doing. This is a project for me to help inform the world and to inform my listeners on how to grow themselves and to grow those around them, right? So when I sat down and started to finally think about it, because I've been wanting to do this project for over 2 years, and I finally, just had the courage to sit down and said, hey, let's build the foundation. When I built my project charter, it was, writing down what were some of just the outline concepts and just outline the project. I want to start a podcast. Okay. I want to do short shows, keep people interested. Again, it's just me wanting to, at the end of the day, the benefits for me out of it were to, again, get a message across, get this information that's in my head and blast it out to the world and hopefully help change someone's life or improve someone's life, understanding the requirements, understanding the equipment, the time dedication. Okay. How long did we want this project to be? That was all in that project charter, that foundation plan that I wrote down, and I look back and reference from time to time, especially as we start this, in which direction do we want to go, and we're now 3 weeks in, but it was something that I built 6 months ago, and I'm finally getting it off the ground, but it took myself having to refresh that. So until you put pen to paper, whatever project that you really want to have happen will not really successfully take off until you build that foundation and build it the right way and outline it, see it, listen to it, read it over and over and over again, and you'll actually see some things that you did not expect. Okay. I did not really, when I first thought about it, I said, hey, I didn't really think about the time commitment when I started doing the research on what it takes to do, a podcast and bringing great content. I thought I was just going to hit record and just talk on a microphone and go. And it's one of those things that continuously reminds me on why I'm doing this. What does it take and what do I need to do to be successful in this and to make this Project Life successful? Okay, so that was a recap of last week, and this week we are getting into, on the project management side of the house, we're getting into the heart and soul of what project management tends to be about. So the process group that we're going to end up looking at, we're going to be looking at the planning process group, and then we're over the next few weeks, because this is such a big chunk of the process. It's going to take a few shows to get through them all, to hit all the highlights and to hit some of these concepts and techniques for you guys to grasp and to go into. But so we're going to talk about planning. And for this show, we're going to hit setting your baselines, right? So we're going to go over things like, the development of a project management plan, going over scope, understanding what the requirements are, and so on and so forth. But for me to just translate it from project management jargon to everyday life, this is going to be setting the baselines. Okay. The show is going to be talking about going over the baselines. And again, like I said, it's going to take multiple weeks to go over this and to hit you kind of with everything. But the first portion of it, it's really going to be all about kind of defining what that scope is and understanding what a project management plan is. So I'm just going to jump right into it, because as I use words like develop a project management plan, that is a very detailed plan that takes multiple inputs. But ultimately, this portion of a project, as a project manager, you build a project management plan, and it gets filled and updated on a constant basis, right? So last week we talked about building that foundation, having that document that was very general schedule, understanding what the requirements were, talking about a brief, what do I want the project to be? I want to lose 100 pounds. I want to lose 50 pounds. I want to get my master's degree, whatever that project is. The project charter is very generalized. And the detail that goes into the project then comes later, right? Again, the foundation was last week. This week, we now start setting the baselines. And that project management plan ultimately is all your baselines kind of put into one big document, right? Or it could be really as big as you want it to be. But for project managers, it's a pretty lengthy document that has your baselines for every aspect of project management, right? So we talk about scope, we talk about scheduling, we talk about budgets, we talk about quality and control, we talk about, all these different items that are set. Where do resources come from? How are we going to deal with risk? How, where's our human resources and our workforce coming from? How are we going to handle that? How are we dealing with the stakeholders? How are we talking to them? How are we engaging them? How are we managing them? That's all dealt out in this project management plan. So as you guys hear that phrase, just understand that this is the plan. right? This is ultimately the plan and you outlining the project that you want to do in your life. So if it is taking, for example, I want to complete my master's, this is that here's where all the details come into that project management plan. Okay. So this goes over the full time frame, right? I want to start in the fall. It takes 36 credit hours. It takes this, and this. You plan out everything from detailing out the scope. And when we talk about details for something of that sort, you need to plan out exactly what you want. Write out exactly what you want out of the project. Okay. So if we're going to use getting your master's as an example, so it needs to be, I want to get my master's in this concentration, this GPA, this time frame. And then you start to dive in and start to collect the requirements and understanding, okay, I need to take X amount of classes for this concentration. I need this amount of core classes. I need this amount of elective classes. This will be my thesis, and so on and so forth. So that all gets wrapped into the project management plan. So for you, the best way to look at this and building a project management plan is building out the plan. I'm telling you, everybody, if you take the time to do the legwork up front, and this is why the planning portion of a project management lifecycle or project lifecycle, the planning portion is the most extensive portion of all 5 phases of the project. Okay. And if you do it right, it can lead to success. And that should hit home in life. The more effort you put up front to the project or the event that you want to complete, again, it could be doing your master's, it could be, getting your kids through school, it can be anything that you want it to be. Whatever this project is, give it a name, give it a definition, understand the requirements, and build out the plan. So the project management plan is the overall plan with all your baselines. And a few of the baselines that we're going to get into, the one that we're going to get into today is scope management. Okay. And understanding the scope. What do you got to do? And really the scope is kind of a fancy term for what is the details of the job, right? What is the project? Outline the project in more than just a general idea of I want to go get my master's. It's I want to go back to school, to X school, receive a master's in business administration in the following concentration area from this school, and take in 36 credit hours that are outlined in XYZ courses, and so on and so forth. So that's what we talk about when we talk scope, right? What is kind of the outline and detail of the project outside of just what the general project is. Okay. So when we talk scope, just a couple things to understand too as well is one thing that we deal with a lot in project management that happens to us on a day-to-day basis is what we call scope creep. Okay. And typically on a project, right, deal with this on a regular basis when it comes to construction projects. But scope creep is typically when you have your owner who continuously modifies and wants to change the overall scope, whether it's adding certain things here or changing or trying to approve things that will completely derail everything, like the schedule and the resources, the manning, obviously profitability, and so on and so forth, and as well as can actually take some of the benefits and the idea behind the project and divert it into a completely different direction. So if a owner, and in this case yourself, if we're going to continue to use this going back to school example, doing things like adding multiple majors or adding different certificates because you're in a particular school and you think it's cool, and now you're adding particular things that takes away from you graduating with your master's or your MBA that divert you from what that ultimate goal is. That's kind of where you deal with some of the scope creep in understanding on trying to deal with that and ensure that if you are going to add things to your project or to your bottom line on what you want to do with this project, that you understand the impacts that it's going to have, and be honest with yourself on if it's really going to derail the process. Is it going to add to it? Is it going to add more cost? Is it going to add more time? And do I have the ability to actually take that additional stuff on? So just when you hear that term, mentally, as you build these projects, some of the things that you want to ensure that you are doing is making sure that you're not adding more to your plate that is not necessary, that is ultimately going to hit the project. Okay, so what does all this mean? Okay, we're sitting here, we're talking project management plans, right? And now we're talking about scope, developing scope, and things of that sort. So ultimately, like I said, the project management plan is a plan filled with multiple different baselines. The first baseline that you'll deal with is your scope baseline. Okay. And at this point, the first thing you're going to want to do is create a scope management plan. Some of the things that's going to actually outline is you want to plan the process, define the work that needs to be done over the course of the project. Who's going to be involved? What are the actual requirements? Okay, this is when, and different things are going to feed into this. So now think of it as multiple separate documents kind of built into one, right? So if the book is a project management plan, chapter 1 is going to be your scope management plan, okay? And within that scope management plan, you're going to build it off a few different things, right? So you're going to collect requirements, you're going to define your scope, and then we typically do these work breakdown structures, and you kind of break out the work that needs to be done based on the scope and the requirements, and then you start divvying it out to your team and so on and so forth, right? So that's kind of that in a nutshell. But so chapter 1 within this project management plan is, to plan your scope management, okay? And first subsection of that is going to be, how do you collect requirements, okay? And understanding that the collecting requirements is the process of determining, documenting, and managing stakeholder needs and requirements to meet the overall project objectives. Okay, so here we're talking about your life. You are obviously going to be one of the stakeholders, owner for your life in the project that you're trying to complete. At this point, this is where you want to go ahead and collect the ultimate requirements for your project. Okay, now there's a couple things that you can do. Okay, and we're going to continue to use this going back to school to get my master's as that process. Okay, but in order to collect those requirements, you can do a few different things, right? You can do interviews. You can sit there and you can call the school and talk about, what do I need? Okay, what do my scores need to be? Do I need to take the GMAT? Okay, do I need to take, the MCAT if you're trying to get into medical school? Like, what do those scores need to be? Okay, you write those things down. Okay, you do research on the internet. Okay, if the school, which most schools do, they have the planned out requirements. They planned out classes on, hey, if you want this concentration, these are the classes that you have to take. Like when I got my MBA in project management, it says here are the core classes that you absolutely have to take. Then here are the clusters of classes based on the project management cluster. We offer 15 classes. You have to take XYZ. Okay. So the map was there. Okay. Now you can also talk timelines. What's it going to take? What requirements is it going to take? Can I do my classes on an 8-week schedule? Do I have to come to school every single day? Is it Monday, Wednesday, Fridays? Is it online? This is the part of the project to where you gather all that data. You can interview people, use focus groups. Okay. Obviously do your own research online. Get reviews of the school. there's quite a few different ways, as project managers, that we use this process to help define what the scope of the project is and collecting the requirements for the project to help us get a better understanding of what is needed, right? So obviously we have our plan scope management that goes into this. That is the subchapter in the first bolded heading. Will be collecting the requirements. And for you, again, this is understanding and fully writing down what the requirements of your project, of your life, need to be. I can't emphasize this enough that putting pen to paper is going to be one of the key concepts of this whole thing, so that you can actually see it, that you can actually understand, because a lot of times we allow our minds to trick ourselves to think something is so easy that it could be done, that we do it half-assed because we think that it's going to be easy until we dive right in and we figure out it's a lot harder for us than we actually expected. And the reason why is because we never did the due diligence to understand what it fully required in order to prepare ourselves both mentally and physically to move forward with this particular project. Okay. In school, that is definitely something that you want to do your research to understand. One, what is fully required on all aspects? What kind of financial requirements are there? Okay, what kind of time requirements are there going to be? Because it's going to impact the stakeholders that you've outlined in your foundation. Because if your family is part of that stakeholder, which they should be, right? If your family is outlined as a stakeholder, and now you understand what the time requirements are going to be, what is that going to do for your family time? What is that going to do for your work time? Okay, so when I went back to get my MBA, just as a personal experience, I had to understand what the schedule was going to be, that my courses were going to be 8-week blocks and clusters, okay, that I can spread out. I could take one class, I could take 3 classes. Not likely that I would take 3 classes because that's a large workload on a master's program, but I understood what days things were due, and I outlined it to my family. These are the days that I'm going to do my homework from this time to this time, and we went from there. So I had to collect those requirements from the school, though. I had to understand what those requirements entailed so that I can successfully move forward and still successfully be a dad, spend time with my kids, have fun at work while still being a good student in school. Okay. Then we move on to the next subsection, right? So after we've collected our requirements, we then want to define the scope. So ultimately, this ends up being your what statement on describing exactly what your project entails. So now that you've taken your requirements, this is you writing down or you stating somewhere what the actual project is based on now all the requirements that you have, and outlining a statement, okay? At the end of it all, when you go through the defined scope process, you end up coming out with a scope statement, right? And in most projects, it ends up being a few sentences, maybe even a paragraph that outlines exactly what the project is in detail on ultimately what's going to happen based on now what the requirements are going to be. And if we go back to getting our master's or getting our degree, let's just say getting our degree in general, we'll just use getting our degree. Okay. That project in itself, as you define the scope and you tie in all the requirements, you've interviewed people, you've done your research, you now understand what you want to do and how you want to do it in a short statement. And you call that your what statement. You had your charter that you can consider your why statement or your why document. And now you've defined exactly what you want to do. And you've defined this project. And you've created this baseline on what these baseline requirements are. And this baseline statement that you can, when you have it written down, you have it posted up somewhere, you have it on your mirror, you have it in your room, your office, in your notebook, in your phone. You create this defined scope statement outlining everything that needs to be done for your project, whatever that project may be. And within this statement, you get into detail. I want to get my master's. I want to get my bachelor's degree from the University at Texas at Austin in construction management. It's going to take 120 credit hours with max of 16 credit hours per semester, half online, half in person. It's going to cost $125,000 hypothetically. And you outline what those details are. And you create this baseline statement with the requirements. And then after you do that, we go into what we call, you create a work breakdown structure where you've taken project deliverables, right, of going to school, getting your bachelor's degree. That's the ultimate deliverable, but you could break down everything you have to do into small bite-sized chunks. So when you actually start making schedules and everything else, you can tie those activities back to your schedule, and it becomes a lot more manageable. So the next step of this, or this next subsection of, chapter 1 of your project management plan, as you define your scope management plan, is you break all the requirements down into small chunk-like items, right? And you put them on a chart, or you don't have to put them on a chart, but you can write them all down so you can understand which ones you can attack when. And when you start to sit down and do your schedule and you start to do your budget, you take these two things, right? And you can even assign different stakeholders to them, right? Even though you're ultimately the main stakeholder, one of the main stakeholders, in this particular project, right? If we're talking about going back to school. But you take those requirements and you break them down into small sized chunks, which then makes things a lot more manageable on a regular basis as compared to looking at a sheet that has 100 requirements on it. And then you start to feel overwhelmed. Then you start to second guess yourself. And then our brain, our enemy inside of our head, who tells us that we can't do this or we can't plan this. And this is where we start to see ourselves fail, and we start to see issues start to arise of where any kind of self-doubt or anything that deviates us from our plan, then we either start to quit and things of that sort. And that's kind of where, my energy for this show comes from, is because the things that I've been talking about here can help with that. If you can break it down into small size chunks, into manageable, take those 1,500 items and make it one by one and start to tackle those things, it becomes a lot more manageable for you to complete that project within your life and make that project successful, not a incomplete or unsuccessful project. Make that a successful project. And this is the first step, right? So we're setting these baselines. So now we have our baseline. We have our scope. We know what we want to do. We know what the project is. We know what the project entails. Okay. And we've created our what statement. And man, we're going down the path. Okay. We're going down the track to ensure that these projects within our life are going to be super successful. Because as we roll into the next thing, now we start to talk about schedules, right? So next week's episode's going to be about schedules. And that one's going to be another good one. We'll try to bring in a couple different guests to talk about timelines and time frames and scheduling, because that is so important. But that's another baseline that goes into this big book that we're creating called our project management plan. We're in the baseline phase and planning all this out, on dealing with all this different stuff. And part of this plan scope management, in defining scope and everything else, part of what goes into that, all that, is also talking about how do we deal with things like scope creep, okay? What happens if the idea of going another route, or I want to add a certificate on top of my, on top of my major, or I want to add an associates, and and you can outline to yourselves on what are your left and right limits for this, so that you don't deviate off the plan before you have to reevaluate. The great thing about project management, and through each process group and through each phase, you can update things. You go back, you can update that foundation charter. Like if you actually do the analysis and say, okay, I want to do this and this now, you can go back there and update some of the analysis that was done. You can go back and update your scope management plan and your project management plan based on some of the requirements. Okay, you may get down into the scheduling part of things, and things are going to change. Okay, so now you have to update your scope a little bit because of what the schedule is going to require. So that's the great thing about project management, and these tools that I want to jam into you, and understanding that, hey, just tweak this a little bit. Okay, just tweak this one part a little bit, or go back. Okay. And, just like a work breakdown structure, if you Google what a work breakdown structure is, it's going to take you to, crazy looking chart and things of that sort. And it's like, what the hell is this? But it's really just taking your activities, breaking them down into small like chunks, and then start, that will then go into the planning and the resources on what does each activity or what each requirement need in regards to time, resources, and so on and so forth. So that's that portion of it, guys. And I hope that, this all just doesn't sound like, educational mumbo jumbo, that you can actually start to see or think about a project that you could have done some of this on, that either went awry or didn't go the way that you wanted to, or that it could have been better if you stopped, planned it out a little bit, and then move forward. Because again, like I said earlier in the show, planning is the biggest portion, the biggest phase within the project management life cycle, or should I say the project life cycle. And the better that you can lock that portion down, the likelihood that your project will be more successful in the end. Now, the way projects run nowadays and the way life is, right? I am not trying to say that, your planning portion has to be planned to a T, and that you can't deviate off the plan, and that this is what you have to do. And once you plan it, you have to stick to it, and you're locked into this, and you can only do it this way. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying if you hit some of the bigger hurdles and you outline some of these things, and if you put pen to paper, and I will continuously reference that throughout my shows, putting pen to paper, you may now open your eyes and open yourself to things that you didn't realize that could be an issue, or that were part of the project, or that could impact your project. And now you can at least adjust yourself mentally, physically, financially to make the project more successful. Again, that's really the goal here, guys, is to give you guys those nuggets to kind of open up the eyes on what are a couple little nuggets, what are a couple extra things that I can do to make my life better, more successful. And it's really, and it comes down to just some of the planning that we do. Honestly, it comes down to some of the planning. And as we talk about scope, as we talk about schedules, as we talk about cost, as we talk about quality management, it all sounds super educational, but it relates back to our lives. It really does. If we can clearly define what we want from ourselves, right? And one of the most common things, January 1st, what does everyone want to do? Everyone wants to start to lose weight. But why not in December? Are you not planning exactly what that looks like, instead of making an on the fly decision to lose weight come January 1st? Why not in December? Are we not looking at what exactly I myself want? I want to lose 20 pounds. I want to be on this diet. These are going to be the requirements that I need to do. If you think about it, that's why a lot of those plans fail. Why do by January 17th, most people are off their New Year's resolution to lose weight because they didn't have a plan going into it. On the fly, I want to do this. This is how it works. It's a project, guys. It really is a project if you start to think about it. It is a project that if planned right and resourced right and adjustments are made and anticipated, then any Now, guys, that's all the time that I got for this week. Just to kind of recap, we went ahead and we talked this week about getting our project management plan together and going through chapter 1 of that project management plan, which is define scope management. And ultimately, when it breaks down to it, a project management plan is just that big book that outlines your plans and your baselines, because this is what it is. It is a baseline, a starting point, a well-defined starting point that can ultimately change if you want it to change. But this is you defining what your project needs to be, what it requires, writing it down and creating that initial baseline. And make sure you guys come back with me next week as we're going to start getting into schedule management, talking timelines, talking schedule baselines, all that other good fun stuff on scheduling. And I am looking to hopefully have one of my good buddies of mine, Master Sergeant Marcus Davis, coming in with me. He's an operations sergeant in the United States Army, if I can get my words out. And he deals with scheduling. He got a few different companies that he has to manage and look over on a timeline basis. So I'm super excited. If I could get him locked in, guys, I will bring him in to share some knowledge with you guys. So I hope to see you guys next week. Thanks again.
That's a wrap for this week's episode of the Project Life Podcast. Thank you again for tuning in. And if you like what you heard, please be sure to subscribe, like, share with your friends and family. Till next time.